Coming to the core of today's talk is all about ColourNext. This is a property which we have been having for the last about 23 years now. A very strong research, which is Indian research, which we do in terms of panning almost about 9 months in a year in terms of how we look at possibly the whole area of color, the whole area of material play which comes in, and that is why we talk of color and material intelligence in terms of what we speak as the core essence of this whole area. This is something which we look at attributing from a point of view of saying that when we look at this entire thing, we look at culture, we look at emotion, we look at all these elements coming together for us in a framework we can really look at in terms of how future is looking in terms of when we look at the whole area of color essence going forward to that extent. We have been doing this as both an art and a science. As we look at it, it's something where we look at studying the socio-economic trends. We look at how these trends affect lifestyles, and from lifestyles we look at decor trends, and from decor trends we look at color and material in terms of how it emanates out of it to that extent. As part of this process, the entire exercise is fairly detailed, where we do visual mapping, we look at going to the experts, we look at design schools, which we work with, and then we look at style leaders in terms of looking at how they kind of culminate and bring about stories, which we can look at adding color and material to. And the final output is something which we call as the CMFT, which is color, material, finish, and texture boards, which come in, which is a pure work in terms of how we look at some of these areas visually appearing to us in terms of, as a thought, in terms of the story, how it unfolds. So today I'm looking at 4 stories, which I'm going to unfold for you. And these stories are interconnected in a way in terms of how they come in. And you will have a visual treat of all this, something when you step into the, obviously, the color pavilion in terms of looking at. So quickly moving on to the first story. The first story is IRL. I think we're all familiar with IRL in terms of looking at, really looking at from the, the Gen Zs, the Gen Alphas, and so on and so forth. And it's literally in the present. So that's why the whole story is about sculpting the present in terms of how we really talk of, in terms of looking at it. And this story basically is brilliant because it responds to the whole area of saying that today, we don't have a choice available because the world, in terms of where we are looking, it is really maddening from the point of view of the algorithmic, structures we go through, the whole area of looking at the madness in terms of the digital world, in terms of where it kind of really stems in. There is a creative and a cultural longing which it creates, which is looking at possibly something which is a simple, slow life in terms of what we look, which is simple, slow, and joy in terms of what really this story looks at emanating in a world where you are talking of speed, you are talking of screens which are going all over the place in terms of what we see. And the beautiful part of the story is that this whole concept talks of presence and our intention of making choices which are more pro-human than anti-tech. So these are clear story indicators which come in, and as I see it, 4 words which really describes this story, or maybe more, is what we talk of deliberate, we talk of something which is pro-human, we talk of wholesome, we talk of longevity, we talk of simple joys which come in, and we talk of timefulness. So these are some clear words which would possibly define this story in a very different way. And today, when we look at the inspirations around us and the research which shows very clearly that these are something which is realistic areas which are coming. Today, it's all covered through social media as well. And we look at possibly the emergence of the third spaces, which are really coming, and that is a very strong trend in terms of what we see. So whether it is in terms of looking at supper nights, or whether it is in terms of looking at possibly cafes where people really long for analog spaces to kind of come in. These are something which is in real time in terms of what's happening. And that's something which we look at in terms of as a big story which kind of really surfaces. And when we look at this story, the color palette is equally interesting, and the color palette varies from mid-tones, which is colors like brickstone, river stones in terms of what we see. It also has playful pastels, which kind of come into the fore to that extent. At the same time, in terms of some warmer tones, in terms of the billboard yellow and so on and so forth, which kind of really emanates in terms of this color palette. So fairly kind of diverse in terms of the palette, in terms of what we see. But what is interesting is possibly the whole area of material. Okay, so the material becomes very, very strong in terms of what we kind of look at. It's talking of veined marbles, it talks of grained woods, which kind of really comes in. It talks of basically brushed metal, which comes in, and really looking at various kinds of wood surfaces which unfold in terms of giving us a view in terms of what this story is all about. Let's take a look at what this story is visually.
I step outside to feel the day. I pause, breathe, notice. Connection over distraction. The time it takes to make a beautiful thing. Time stretches instead of slipping. Nowhere else to be. What if we stayed here just a moment longer?
That's the story for you, which is all about sculpting the present. And I think now I take the opportunity in terms of calling someone who's going to speak possibly something how this story really is from her point of view in terms of how it unfolds. We have with us Ria Chopra. I wanted to quickly introduce her. Ria Chopra is a writer, independent journalist, and cultural commentator whose work examines the intersection of the internet, pop culture, and India's young demographic.
Thank you so much, Mr. Syngle, for that generous introduction. Yes, hi, I'm Ria. I'm a writer. I write about India's young people and the way we interact with the internet and what it does to us and what we do to it. My book about the same recently came out. It's called Never Logged Out, which is why it's a little funny to me that I am going to be talking about logging out and about a trend that is pretty much IRL. Okay, so IRL is what I'm going to be talking about from my perspective and just in terms of cultural signals that we see specifically in India. Mr. Syngle has already spoken about the trend, and the report will talk to you extensively about what IRL looks like, what it feels like, and what it means. What I want to talk about is to take a step back and look at how we got here. The analog renaissance is not something that any of us have not heard about. It's bandied about repeatedly right now in the zeitgeist. People are writing about it, people are talking about it. How did we get here, and why now, of all times, are we talking about going offline? This is a story that starts with fatigue, with rebellion, with feeling overstimulated but underwhelmed all the time, feeling like we're moving but not really moved by anything at all. That's how we got to IRL as a trend. And I want to look at 3 shifts over the past few years that brought us here. First, I want to talk about in 2020, which is when the pandemic hit all of us and confined us to our homes, with nothing but our screens for company, right? That's when doom scrolling became a thing. But along with that, people also had the time to do more things at home with their families, with their hands. This is the time you see the rise of this cottagecore aesthetic, baking your own sourdough, making your dalgona coffee, crocheting becoming a thing. For the first time in a very long time, you have people picking up tactile hobbies. Around 2020 to 2021 is also when reading books starts becoming a major thing, both online and hence, of course, offline. This is the time when, after a very long time, the literature industry turns a profit. So we have a focus also on wellness, on health that comes about with the pandemic itself, giving people the realization that our bodies, our physicality is something that we need to care about. So this is what in 2021 I think of as the first shift of people contending with what the digital life has done to us as a whole, coming to terms with how digital our life is right now, and getting a small taste of what a more offline or like a homely existence could look like. The second shift I look at is a 2022 to 2023 sort of timeline as the world gradually opens up and we come to terms with what our doom scrolling has done to us. This is when loneliness is at an all-time high. That's a screenshot from 2023 in The Guardian when the WHO declared loneliness as being a public health epidemic. Not just due to social distancing, though obviously that also added to it, but also a realization that connection through screens, which is what we were doing in the past couple of years, just doesn't cut it. Like, you need real human interaction to actually happen. There's also a public conversation that starts around 2022 about the harms of social media. That's when Meta and TikTok testify in front of the US Congress about data stealing, showing targeted ads to people, pushing people to buy more. This is when people realize that we may follow influencers, but we actually get influenced in a lot more ways online than even we gave consent to. This is when people come to terms with what a lot of screen time has done to them. Screen fatigue is a term that we start seeing around those times. And obviously, this is also a time when people start doing revenge travel again. The world is opening up. People are meeting in person, supper clubs, book clubs, etc. start taking off at this point of time. So there's a re-emergence of connection as something people are genuinely seeking. We also start seeing some analog percolate into fashion, like you have wired earphones coming back. This is when I remember Bella Hadid went viral for wearing wired earphones out in public, and people were like, okay, wired is so back in right now. I think this is also the time when a 2000s fashion revival is happening, and hence, obviously, a 2000s tech revival is something that we can also correlate to the same thing. So this is 2022, 2023. The third shift and the final shift that I want to talk about is post-2024, which is when our tiredness with screens is transformed into almost an anger. I like to call it rage against the machine because I'm a pop culture fan, but let's call it whatever we want to call it, right? Make Instagram again is a conversation we start seeing around this time. And we realize that tech CEOs have pretty much ruined our social media experience just for their profit. AI anxiety also starts bleeding into the cultural zeitgeist. You have creatives being loud and vocal and protesting and going on strike against the anxieties that AI is giving to them as a career. We also see a rise of no phone rules in fashionable public spaces, including like fashion shows itself, as well as a rise in media that is warning us about what tech is doing to us. I've put two examples. One is Adolescence that came out last year, early last year. And obviously Control, closer home. We have Ananya Pandey in an AI takeover sort of situation. And once Ananya Pandey is in something, you know it's part of like popular consciousness. So we have an anti-tech sort of thing coming straight off into Indian pop culture. These are three shifts that I think over the past few years have really added to a desire, a need to seek IRL connection. I want to talk about work I did with District a few months back, which is a Zomato subsidiary that does IRL events. It's a report called Touching Grass. We analyzed ticket sales and we looked at consumer buying trends in terms of what people wanted to do offline. We broke down the trends we saw and predicted in the realm of physical events what we would see in the next few years. You can read the full report if you want to, you can just look it up. But the one biggest trend that we saw is that people really want to touch grass, right? People really want to step out. The amount of money people are spending on physical events, on events that put them in the same room as other people with whom they can actually talk without a screen mediating them, is extremely high. People want to be away from their devices and be immersed IRL. Some of the words ColourNext is associating with the IRL trend are here. There's a sense of warmth, participation, tactility, pleasure, sensuality almost, in that you engage your senses. Pro-human is, as Mr. Syngle said, like one of my favorite words because it means we are not anti-tech. We are just looking to add that human element back in. It's, and also like a quick caveat here, every time someone talks about like slowness or like warmth or return to roots, I feel like skeptics think it can be a little boring. Just a few examples to show you that IRL can be extremely fun and very, very cool as well, like a rave in a Mumbai local, or a full speakeasy experience, or even a kink workshop where you learn about shibari. So people want community, joy, third spaces, shared presence. It's a good time to be an extrovert because you get to connect with people and there are opportunities to do that. It's a good time to be a nerd. If you've seen the rise in trivia nights and bar lectures that are happening across Indian metro cities right now, it's a lovely time to be a reader because book clubs are at an all-time high. You have young people starting reading communities, silent reading in a Cubbon Park or in a Lodi garden. Also a good time to be a hobbyist, painting, pizza making, pottery, whatever you want, climbing, wall climbing is a huge thing now, parkour, whatever, a lot of opportunities to do that. A good time to be a creative and an artist because there's a contending with what real life art looks like, and is AI a part of that, is tech a part of that, and if not, then how? It's also a good time to be a DIY fan. You don't have to be a professional because hobby classes are at an all-time high. It's okay to be learning. It's okay to be a beginner. You have to show up and do things, and that is very cool right now. Okay, in India in particular is something that I want to talk about. Community is part of India's collective cultural memory because we are a collectivist culture. So coming together is something I think we are biologically wired to do. It's also something that is traditionally part of the way that we live, right? So we see that happening now in the event space hugely, from fake Sangeet parties that up till 6 months back were like all the rage, and every second reel I used to see on Instagram was of a fake Sangeet that was happening, to iftar parties that we're seeing right now, and traditional is cool again, to even Baithaks, which who would have imagined 5 years back that Baithaks would be a thing amongst like Gen Z event goers, but it's happening, right? There is room for everything. There's also a revival of older pop culture that we're seeing, which is why I've put in Himesh Reshamya's Cap Mania tour, sold out shows across all metro cities in India. Look at Sunidhi Chauhan and the way she's performing. Nostalgia is something I think India's always been susceptible to, but what we are seeing now is nostalgia. You have people who haven't experienced the era of like this kind of pop culture before, now seeing it, in experiencing it in real life, and also then afterwards making content about it. So the screen time is more of an afterthought instead of part of the experience itself. You're there to experience, you're there to wear a cap and say like, Jai Mata Di, let's rock, or whatever Himesh makes you do. So it's fun, is what I'm trying to say, being out there in an arena or like in a cool artsy space is just fun for young people right now because that's something we are seeking so deeply. Just a sense of the visual that I associate with IRL personally. It's warm, it's welcoming, it's homemade. It feels familiar and Indian, but also quite cool. Think of like a Subco or a Veronica sort of thing. It's clearly Indian, but there's so much coolness to it. And there's also a sense of tactility, of texture that you see, makes you want to revisit that space again and again because it's fun to be there, feels nice. Yeah, just a couple more examples of the Indian pop culture revival that I sort of link back to IRL in some way. You have older actors like a Zeenat Aman coming back into the zeitgeist. You have a re-release of older Indian movies happening. People want to go talk to these people, watch these people, read about them, because we want to feel that realness again. Okay, so what can the IRL trend look like? And this is a section I want to talk about a little more. Tactile collabs by digital platforms to become IRL is something I think has just started happening and is going to happen even more. Bumble did a collab with the Nike Run Club called Speed Dating, which I think is quite funny if you like get the pun of it. And one can say, like, it's kind of funny actually that Bumble's promise was that offline dating doesn't work, so let's go online, and now they're saying let's go offline again. But it's working, right? People are having fun. Contradiction is also built into real life, and if it works, it works. It was a massive success that the people from the Run Club and people from Bumble just sort of like got there in the same space, and it was a hugely successful event. I also want to mention something I read this morning, which is that AI platform Perplexity has just opened a cafe in South Korea, which I think is a very strange example of an entirely tech platform wanting to establish a real-life presence because they realize that being present in real life, being tactile, people being able to see them, touch them, feel that presence really works. Tactility also means participation in a touch, feel, smell sort of way. So think of Papa's in Bombay, which has designed a very intimate dining experience in a way that the consumers there also get to talk to the chef and like hear their stories. I think that kind of involvement, that kind of presence is what people really want to feel, and design of experiences in that way can really help facilitate and nurture that kind of connection. Merch and collectibles is becoming a big thing online, and I see a lot of it percolating onto social media now. Subco has their own merch, and they've been cool for a while. But Peter Cat did a collaboration with Subco about these very nostalgic beta bites. A music brand label, whatever you want to call it, doing a food collab is like out of left field, but it also works, which also means that if the field that you come from does not have tangibility built into it, you can look for partners to help nurture that tangibility for you. Tactility is just very in, basically. Rolling Loud also did a special menu at Veronica's so that even people who can't go to their festival don't just experience it through Instagram and FOMO through Reels alone. You can still go and eat like a Rolling Loud branded burger at Veronica's, which I think is quite a cool thing to do. Another thing that IRL is sort of in my head doing is the rise of intimate invite-only events that welcome you and invite you to be a part of the history and culture of the space that you're in. This is an evening event organized by the Serendipity Arts Festival here at the Safdarjung Tomb. I had the privilege to be part of this event. It was lovely, and there was a sense of everyone wanting to be immersed in the ghazal evening that was going on, and to be present in that moment and experience it for the cultural delight that it was. You didn't see too many people taking out their phones to take pictures. There was a sense of respect for the art that was going on, and I think also a desire to be in that moment and really feel this exclusive space that you got to be a part of. Okay, and finally, this is my last slide. I think personalization is so in right now. We come from the social media era of like link in bio, and I'll tag the brand so that you can buy what I'm wearing exactly. And I think now we're at a time of custom and of gatekeeping. Nobody can buy what you have, because what you have is one of a kind, and I think that's a very cool space to be in. Two brands that I just want to talk about is Gully Labs, who I really like as a brand. They make shoes that are rooted in Indian craft. I think that is their promise and their branding. But you can also personalize your shoes. They have a charm station in their Panchil Park shop where you can personalize your sneakers with like little charms on them. So nobody has the exact pair of shoes that you do. Another one is Go Rug Yourself, where you can do DIY tufting. Basically means no one else will ever have the rug that you own, because one, you made it yourself, and two, you can do whatever wacky thing you want there. Craft is in, getting your hands dirty is in, owning and experiencing real things in real places and real emotions is so in, because you also gather stories along with the experiences that you have. Real life is so in right now, and I had a very good time at the ColourNext Pavilion right opposite, where you can see the design elements of this also. I would urge you to also visit and see what this looks like in design practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Ria. It was a real eye-opener in terms of what you just shared with us, and I think the whole versatility in terms of what we see from what to what. I think nothing is left out in terms of where possibly this segment doesn't want to be into that extent, and I think really got enamored by what you spoke of about the DIY, and we've been for a time kind of trying to get DIY into the whole area of painting and color very, very strongly. How this entire segment is really kind of changing and really ruling the paradigm in terms of possibly trending in terms of what's coming in, and that's why we feel that IRL possibly is in a right place in terms of what we speak of in terms of looking at going forward. So I think let's kind of transgress to the next story in terms of what we want to speak. The next story is what we call is the pastoral. And this story is about really land-held luxury. So it's a story which really redefines the luxury in a very different way. It redefines luxury through lineage, through locality, and inherited craft in terms of what we see. It is something which possibly looks at, really invoking the whole area of the cultural capital and really seeing that how possibly cultural knowledge can be really kind of put into the game, so that possibly this is a nuance which kind of really gets really appreciated in terms of going forward. It is one thing which really talks of saying that when you talk of this entire story, it is about getting away from this speed of currently the environment we are, the whole area of visible sameness in terms of what we keep on seeing around us, and how that we can take time. And that is an essence in terms of looking at being separate from this entire area to that extent. And therefore, it really talks of being off the grid, which is the new luxury in terms of what really comes in. So I think the story is very, very interesting in terms of what it really speaks about. Some of the core words which kind of really come into shape when you talk of this entire trend is about simple life. It is being off the grid, as I said. It is about veneration. It is about cultural capital. It is something where we look at hyper-local, hyper-premium. So some of these are some key words in terms of what come into mind when we speak about this entire story. When we look at some of the influences clearly coming in, today we see that the whole area of cultural capital. Today, Central Asia is becoming a very big part of this today because some of the stories in West are not so strong in terms of really talking about the culture capital to that extent. And that is something which is really a stronger observation which is coming. It's all about how people are invoking the culture capital. If you look at the number of biennales which are happening now across Asia to that extent, Uzbekistan is talking of a biennale which is coming to that extent and looks at many of these areas where invoking art is becoming very strong, and the whole area of a cultural appetite is becoming very, very strong in terms of what we are kind of looking at. And not only that, I think today there are so many researches which is talking of people really going off the grid, okay? People like to travel something to basically unknown spaces, and that is definitely what is defining luxury from a point of view of how people are looking at really kind of celebrating their life in terms of how they kind of go ahead. So if you look at the color palette, obviously there's a bold palette in terms of what you see, much stronger nuances in terms of color, which you see in terms of possibly, a dark pink, which is kind of coming in along with some dark hues like a carbon copy, which comes in at the same time. Possibly you are talking of really some of the bolder shades kind of really taking this thing which are high in pigment in terms of what you see. So I think it becomes really a strong palette in terms of what it sees. But more importantly, when we see the whole area of the material palette is something which is mixed in terms of, talks about a beaten metal, it talks of tactile surfaces, silk, and many other areas in terms of what really come in, which is a mix of tactility as well in terms of what it kind of speaks of. So I think that's how basically the whole material palette looks like in terms of looking. Let's look at the visual story. That's what landed luxury in terms of what we speak of. And we have someone very accomplished who's traveled for far to kind of really look at adding credence to this story which comes in, and like to kind of introduce her. Her name is Rigzin Lachic. I think all to you, Rigzin.
Jule, everybody. My name is Rigzin Lachic, and thank you for the introduction. Thank you, ID and Asian Paints, for having me here today. I am also a little nervous because I don't come from a design background. However, I'm a millennial, so I have printouts in case I forget what I have to say. So when we speak about the future of design, we often speak about innovation and trends. But where I come from, design was never about trends. It was about survival. So while we look ahead to forecast what's next, my work has often pushed me to look back and at systems that have always been intelligent. Ladakh is not one landscape, it is many geographies compressed into one region. On the western edge, you have Turtuk, which is almost the last village in Ladakh. You can see that, design has been influenced by, or you can see the imprint of Balti culture in the lattice work, in the woodwork. And then you go to the extreme eastern side of Ladakh, which is Changtang, where the stories are entirely different, home to the nomadic Changpa community, where design pushes for mobility. And that's why instead of homes, we have tents made of hand-woven yak wool, mostly woven by men. And they're naturally insulating, naturally waterproof. So this is where design really is shaped by the altitude, the climate, the livelihood, and mobility in this case. In the central region of Ladakh, in Jungkhor, where the agrarian pastoral settlements are visible, design was completely aligned with the landscape. Earth is not a cladding. The 2 feet or the 3 feet wide walls cater to thermal mass. The south-facing openings, because sun is an extremely important element when it comes to design in Ladakh. The winter, the 4 or 5 months of harsh winters calls for, south-facing structures. Small windows and thick walls is what we usually see. And the beauty, I think, in nature is that the challenges that a particular landscape throws at you, the solutions are often found in the region itself. And that is very, 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 very obvious in our vernacular design practices. So we don't refer to mood boards and we don't refer to color palettes, but nature in Ladakh humbles you down to an extent where nature itself becomes the palette. The browns of, the mud, the grays of the stone, the beautiful browns of wood, and the golden sun. So this is our ancestral home, which was 150 years old. A living house in Ladakh is basically, so the ground floor would normally be the stables, the middle floor would be the kitchen, and above you would have, your shrine. And that was the order in which a living house was designed. This house was made of natural materials, mud, wood, and stone. And when I quit my job and moved to Ladakh, I wanted to set up something in my grandmother's little apple and apricot orchard where this house was. And when we dismantled this house, I realized that there was no waste that came out of it because everything either went back into the ground or it was repurposed. And I think that is the beauty in using natural materials, and that's when we decided that we wanted to use natural materials as much as possible. So this is the front building of Dolkhar, which is a replica of the old house. We've repurposed all the materials from the old house that you've seen. The reason why we also wanted to build locally was, when I moved to Ladakh, I realized that there was a sense of pride in imported goods. And somewhere I think I wanted to, showcase that local can also be perceived as luxury. We have 7 villas within the property. These are semi-passive solar. So again, they're built using the same vernacular techniques where the walls are 2 feet wide. They're very energy efficient because they're semi-passive solar and they're southeast facing. They're insulated glass windows. And again, the reason why we wanted to only build 7 was to somewhere showcase that tourism doesn't have to always cater to a larger sort of traveler, a larger number of travelers. So we worked with over 40 local craftsmen across the region to build the space. The local willow and poplar wood, the 2 trees that you find across Ladakh, because it's a cold desert and there isn't enough greenery as such. Each of the willow pieces were hand-laid across the entire property. It took about 2 years for us to get through this process itself. We've used mud plaster, and it's mostly just clay from the region itself. We've used pebbles instead of tiles. We've used slate stones from the mountains itself. This is one of our wood artisans from this village called Marsho. So he's using willow to make all our partitions within the property itself. And this is a traditional technique called shak, which you don't see as much anymore. We used natural red clay, again, from this village called Basgo to do the insulation, which was mixed with all the waste wood shavings that came out of the construction. So this naturally sort of insulated the building as well. The slate stones that you see on the back wall are also from the mountains close by. The artisans that we worked with were some potters from Likir. We worked with some weavers across the Changtang region, again, the eastern side of Ladakh. So our rugs were hand-woven, our throws, the cushion covers that you see, they're all locally made. The stone artisan from Turtuk has made our wash basins, which again took him about a year and a half to give us 16 pieces. They turned out smaller than I wanted to be, but I think that's where you start compromising on practicality when it comes to, design. The metal craftsmen have made our latches, our locks across the property. Chaspai Dolkhar is also our in-house restaurant where we've sort of applied the same fundamentals, where we highlight the local ingredients of the region through food. Again, these are some images of our food experience. Now I feel like I'm promoting my property. So, I just want to say that, in a world driven by trends where change is constant and inevitable, perhaps the real question is not how fast we can innovate, but how wisely we can evolve. Can we imagine a future that still recognizes the value of traditional wisdom, where craft is not nostalgia, but knowledge? Thank you.
Thank you, Rigzin. I think that was really wonderful in terms of what you summed it up. I think an apt example of in terms of how do we see, literally the whole area of redefining, luxury in terms of lineage, locality, and inherited craft in terms of what we see. And I was just checking with Ria in terms of saying that for even millennials, they will like this. Not only millennials, even the Gen Z would like this property, and she agreed with that to that extent as we move ahead. Now, this is something which is a very interesting and one of my favorites in terms of what we look. It is called the solar punk in terms of as a trend. It is talking of post-capitalist optimism in terms of how it kind of really looks at in terms of really emanating. It is a trend. It's a story which really expresses the desire for basically resurgence in terms of future in a very different way in terms of how it kind of looks at, where in this future we look at nature and technology having a symbiotic relationship which is there, and optimism is literally the design outcome in terms of how it kind of really comes about. It is also something where we are talking of saying that, the optimism literally defines the future. It's not a landscape of collapse. It's a space which is very progressive and defines possibly repair and renewal, which is part of that space, which basically lends the whole area of positivity in terms of how it really comes in. So if you look at this entire story and trend, it is clearly coming that it is talking of some keywords which is there. The keywords possibly are looking at being future forward, looking at optimism, looking at nature as an ally, and looking at in terms of possibly survivability and looking at high performance in terms of how it comes about. So those are some clear areas in terms of how it emanates to that extent. We are talking of some elements in terms of what we are seeing. What possibly one trend is very clear is the God core in terms of what we see. It's something which is, literally something which is for high performance wear in terms of what comes in. It is also, in a way, invoking fashion to that extent. And that's something which possibly kind of resonates in terms of what's really happening around, in terms of looking at some of these areas kind of coming very, very strongly. People are talking of an optimist future, which kind of comes in, and really looking at some design trends which are bold at the same time and authentic in terms of what it speaks about. When we look at the whole color trend, we have mid to dark tones in terms of what really come in, cool tonalities, complex undertones in terms of what you see emanating here. And today, the material palette is also something which is very interesting because it's talking of a lot of biodiversity, biomaterials which kind of come into it, recycled composites which are there, things like felt, stones which come in and kind of embrace. And that becomes a very, very strong area in terms of how we look at this entire trend kind of emanating. Let's look at the visual story.
We are not waiting for the future. We are building it.
So that's the story in terms of which we fold, which is solar punk. And I would like to now invite someone who's very close to this area, which is Samuel Barclay. Samuel Barclay is an architect and designer whose work is defined by an uncompromising commitment to the act of making. So over to you, Samuel.
So I think perhaps we got this invitation primarily because about 3 years ago we started a company called Solarpunk. I have a collaborator and co-founder named Akshay Tandon, who's based in Goa. He's an entrepreneur and businessman, developer. And we had been in touch over the years talking about various projects. I'll show one of those early on today. And we started Solarpunk thinking about the notion of how can we begin, what would a company that promotes the idea of building more sustainably look like? Would it be one for developing? Would it be one for that services for architects? And slowly through that process it evolved that actually a construction company would be a good way to do it. I caught a good portion of the previous lecture, the group that was here, and one of the questions towards the end was the notion of we have to do this because we love it, because we care about the earth, because of the integrity that we all have, but we have to accept the fact that we're not going to earn on that, which Akshay, I'll say more than me, had the notion that if we're able to do this successfully as a business and a practice, and we want it to be sustainable, not just environmentally, it has to be financially sustainable. It has to be profit-making. Not that it's profit-driven, but it has to be profitable for the employees that we have, the teams, has to be profitable for the architects that we engage with, for the builders, for the developers. And so how do we begin to look at technology? How do we begin to look at materials? How do we begin to integrate innovation into the process of building more sustainably? So Akshay and I were introduced. Actually, he reached out to me. He had seen an early project that we had done, actually exhibited at the Venice Biennale. He reached out to us because he was shocked that that was a practice that was based in Mumbai. He's from Goa. He went to Venice, saw this exhibition there, and reached out to us. And part of what attracted him about the project was our use of materials. This was an NGO school based in Pune, where we used almost exclusively, well, not almost exclusively, literally exclusively low-cost materials, reinforced concrete, out of necessity to create the largest structural system that we could as simply and basically as possible. Reclaimed marble from quarries, from shops, wastage materials that were integrated in to create these beautiful mosaic floors. We worked with a color artist from Copenhagen to create our own paints. Sorry, sir. But we mixed the custom paints on site. This was before we knew of the extent of your capabilities. And so we developed a lot of these things with local practitioners, with our collaborators, everything from engineers, farmers. Part of that system was a very low-tech but integrated design with a company called TransSolar. The engineer was based in New York, and it has a passive cooling system that can control the temperature of the building, lower the temperature between 5 and 9 degrees centigrade without any mechanical systems whatsoever. There are these large earth ducts underneath the building, there are solar chimneys on the roof, and just through the choice of materials and the design of the structure, there's a convection that's created that creates this sort of basically very primitive, ancient, but modernized air conditioning system. So after Akshay and I were introduced to each other, we started working on a project. He at the time was the president of FC Goa, one of the top football league teams in the country. And we talked about the idea, he had a 30-acre site, and we looked at the idea of creating a fully integrated sports academy, integrated with the production of food, with health, with sustainability, education, and obviously training and all kinds of medical technology integration, all of these things looking at a kind of holistic environment. We developed this design, we were really excited about it, we were sort of moving towards construction, obviously local materials in Goa, working with laterite and materials like that, and then the pandemic hit. And so we sort of set that aside. His career took a different trajectory as well, and so while sort of best made plans were made and we were nearly ready to go, it sort of got put on hold, but we stayed in touch. And we sort of continued to have this dialogue, and out of that conversation, the idea of solar punk emerged. And so again, trying to figure out how can we impact, how can we create impact towards a sort of more sustainable future. My wife and I both have kids who were born and brought up here. He has young children as well, and so not just for ourselves, but for them and for everyone that we work with. Young designers ask us a lot about this, and so how can we sort of work towards that? And so we began with this idea, we set up the company, and we began with this idea of how can we create one house that is made without compromise, without extra expense, without additional maintenance. You know, a lot of people imagine Oroville is an incredible place. It's beautiful, it's wonderful, but a lot of clients come to us and say, how can I have all of the values that Oroville espouses without having to move there and eat granola and grow my own food and all those kinds of things? So can I introduce the idea of luxury being clean air and fresh fruit and a beautiful garden and cross ventilation and all of those things without having to compromise by moving to the country and setting all those things up myself. So we began to look at how can we work with technology to integrate systems where the readout that your car gives you every day about how much gas is left, what's the air pressure in your tires, what's your mileage, all those things, can a home do that? So can we have these integrated technology systems that monitor water and energy and give us those readouts? So at the very least, awareness is obviously the first step in correcting behavior. How do we manage sustaining water, sustaining energy, waste management? Obviously, building materials are a part of that. We at Case Design, the first practice that was mentioned, we've always said that the sort of greatest form of sustainability is to produce work of lasting value. So obviously durability, reduced maintenance is a big part of that. And so as we set out to do this, we literally began making our own blocks, right? We wanted to work with earth, so we got hand presses. Eventually the hand presses became more and more sophisticated. We started working with hydraulic presses. Now we have our own factory very close to the site. The blocks that you see here on the left are the construction happening right now. We're putting up some of the timber, which hopefully you'll see in a second. And we began doing tests and samples working with engineers, looking at different binders. Obviously, everyone knows about CSEBs, compressed stabilized earth blocks. Can we do that without cement? We looked at, there was a company in Switzerland, we went and had collaborations with them. They came to India and worked with us. Another company, old friends of mine in Brussels, called BC Architects, which is an amazing practice. We're collaborating with them to, sorry, once again, to develop paints and plasters, but pigments that are purely just coming from earth, and I do know that you guys have an amazing collection of that as well. But looking at how can we find collaborators, because our role is not necessarily to reinvent or to invent these things afresh. We want to take the best practices that already exist, and as designers and curators and ultimately contractors, put all of those together. We are not inventors, full stop. Right? Yes, we're doing the work and we're testing and we're getting engineers and sending things to labs, but we want to sort of assimilate all these things together, put them together as a holistic experience, integrate them with landscape and permaculture, and hopefully produce an amazing result. This is the first project. I apologize that these are renderings, but hopefully very soon these will be actual photographs. We are literally putting these columns up that you see in this view. They're going up on site this week, and we're out of necessity need to have the roof up before the monsoon, of course. But we're really excited. The next step for this is to take this, obviously the scale of one house is a good place to start. We're currently also working with Siri Architects, Kapil Gupta, who's an incredible architect as well. And we're constructing 6 villas that he has designed using this same technology. We're working on development, larger scale housing development. So if you go from 1 to 6 to a small neighborhood to a community, hopefully eventually to a township, as we continue to grow and scale, not just in our capabilities, but also the integration of technology and collaborators, everything becomes easier, right? Water management is easier at a larger scale, energy management, waste management, all of those things become far more efficient. And we're really leaning into the technology integration, but also in that, we like to talk about it as contemporary craft, the idea of how can we integrate the people who have the skill and the local knowledge to work with these things. Everything has to be, while we have access to all of the best practices globally, at the end of the day, all of these things are still made here. They're made on site. They're made in our factory. The blocks you saw are soil taken from the site, compressed a few kilometers away and brought back to the site, trying again, as I think as you mentioned earlier, trying to reduce the carbon footprint, the amount that those things are moving around. Sorry, it was the previous panel talked about taking, it doesn't make sense to take soil 300 kilometers away and then bring it back after it's produced. So one of the things that we're doing is actually producing mobile factories, right? Can we bring the technology and the equipment to the site to produce it there? We're doing some of this in Maharashtra as well. And so, yeah, looking at how all of those systems can come together and integrate into one holistic approach to building more sustainably. Thank you.
Now we come to the last story, and I think this is a story which is, again, very interesting in terms of what it speaks of. It is what we call as daydream, and this is what we define as quiet surrealism in terms of how it unfolds. This is a story where we are, it really offers, a soft suspension in terms of time, where basically we look at romance, we look at translucence, we look at the quiet surrealism to kind of really look at mind enveloped, away from the reality in terms of looking at something which is far more poetic, something which is emotional, which comes in and uses light very, very differently. So it's literally like a shift in terms of literally a design trend in terms of what we speak, where basically there's a blurring in terms of the whole area of mind and clarity, and kind of really invokes luminescence and inner glow, which kind of really comes in very strongly. Some of the key words in terms of what we speak about is romance, hazy, a little bit of escapism in terms of what we see, transient, translucence, and soft in terms of how they kind of come in. When we look at the whole palette from a point of view of how it kind of gets influenced, there are a lot of things in terms of what we see in terms of the overall world where, today the material trend of translucence is something which is emerging. The whole area of ethereal materials which are kind of emerging is a bigger story in terms of what is there to that extent. And therefore, this is something which gets credence in terms of from the point of view of a lot of usage of materials which are very different in terms of how they are kind of really coming and getting evoked to that extent, which is in a very different space in terms of how we see it. If you look at the exact palette, obviously, predictably, you have very light hues, you have very, very soft pastels, washed pigments in terms of how it comes up in terms of the trend. And the whole area of even the material finishes palette in terms of what is there. It talks of, inlays which are there, which is very different micro textures, which possibly get used almost all kind of cast glass block and satin sheets and so on and so forth. So something which is in the realm, which is something which is very, very soft in terms of what it really embraces. Let's look at what the visual story is about. So we have someone very special to kind of really talk about this story. We have, Ravi Vazirani. A lot of you would know about him. Okay, Ravi, as a founder and creative director of Ravi Vazirani Design Studio, where spaces are curated to feel both grounded and timeless. Ravi, all over to you.
Good evening, everybody. So when I think of Daydream, I wanted to go inwards. I wanted to understand how do we adapt to something as a concept? How do we borrow from it without just making it a trend? How do we break it down? And the more I was reading about it, the more I was looking into it, I realized that this is something that has been a part of my DNA for the longest time. What is daydreaming? A series of pleasant thoughts that distract one's attention from the present. No, every creative person needs to zone out. Every creative person sort of disappears and goes into an own zone. And combine that with social anxiety, combine that with wanting to not be extroverted and introverted. Design has always been my tool to sort of create a world of my own. In the office, I had them break this down. We sat down in the studio and we broke down and we took some keywords that made Daydream what it was for us. Excuse the fact that we have two restraints. And these were the words that we really borrowed from the idea of Daydream. Here we see a project of ours, one that we have recently completed. And in this project, you will notice that there is a lot of restraint, there is a lot of light, there is a lot of material play, but there is a very, very strong effort to not overstimulate, to not design from an intent of decorating, to not design from an intent of just displaying, but from an intent of living. And how do you create spaces which don't overstimulate? So the choice of materiality Again, I must apologize. There is no paint over here. This is all lime plaster. We chose to go completely old school, and we did lime plastered walls, but the mix of colors, the bringing in tonalities, the curves, the materiality, and this was all an effort to create a space that allows you to just slow down. This is another spot from the same house, another corner from the same house, where different forms come together, different textures come together. Over the last 5 years, as a design studio, we have also ventured into product design. And I'm a self-taught designer. Nothing is off the limits. And on some days, everything is overwhelming because I haven't studied it. So to see products, to see things that we're designing, to see how they fit into spaces, to understand how they interconnect. We were talking of daydream, we were talking of glow. Resin is a material that I tend to work with a lot. I'm drawn to it a lot. That's James Turrell's sculpture over there, an installation, something that I've seen in person, and it resonates a lot. And how we were able to borrow from that, bring it together, tie the dots, and actually create something, a product that with each sort of attempt can change. If I want to buff it, it goes into a different direction. If I want to keep it matte, it goes into a different direction. And I love the opportunities that it allows us. This is an older project of ours, and when I was looking at images to bring in, I recognized how restraint is something that is so important, and how to not make something trendy, how to not just borrow from things and just place them in there, and what this project represented, what the emptiness in it represented to me, and why it was important in terms of the textures, in terms of the materiality, in terms of the touch and feel factors. We work with several materials, we work with several makers. I love working with stone. I mean, typically when we look at lights, we look at alabaster, we look at materials that glow, but to work with something as heavy as marble and to let it glow, but to not let it overwhelm and not overpower, I really enjoy the process. Again, color plays such an important part of the entire experience, of the entire ecosystem. I borrow a lot. I borrow a lot from everything that I see, everything that I encounter, and that's where you start dreaming, and that's where you start looking at things differently. And a long time ago, when I was looking at a work by Pollock, it just stayed with me, and it was exciting to see how the dots got connected and how we reached where we reached with these pieces. This is another project of ours from a long time ago, and to study what the importance of light does, how the light filters in, what it does to a space. In terms of materiality, talking of textures, talking of different approaches to building things and non-traditional things. Again, as I said, I tend to borrow, I tend to observe, and I tend to get lost. At the bottom over there is an artwork by an artist whose work I'm really inspired by. I own that work. They're known as Ra Naqvi. And it's a work that I keep looking at, and it's a work I get lost into. It's a work that really, really inspires me. And again, the two are connected. It's not like I looked at the work and I borrowed from that, but what you see stays with you, how you connect it. And we ended up building this table out of paper mache, where we worked with the artisans and we created the pigments and how the pigments turn out and how you don't control that. And so this is one of our pieces. Again, the idea of glow, the idea of light, the idea of being able to, of sensory experiences, of how we want to live and how we want to not be overwhelmed. Clearly a word that keeps coming to me every second. These are candles that we've designed. Coincidentally, I have sensory issues. I can't handle smells. So all the candles that we make are more for the visual element of it, for me to be able to engage with them, but not for them to stimulate any sort of experiences that lead to where I am right now, which is my migraine. Again, another older project of ours, clean lines. There was a time when I looked at structure and every line and every placement of the objects was extremely important, the grid of things, how things were being placed, and what light does to a space, how light allows us to engage with a space without it becoming decorative. What I love about working with product, I'm going to go back to that slide as opposed to working in interiors, is the complete juxtaposition, whereas when it comes to interiors, everything is straight, everything is clean, everything has structure. And when we end up designing products, when I'm looking at products, everything is fluid. The complete opposite of the opposite approach to designing. On the left is an image from the same project where you saw the curved walls. Again, we worked with Tadilakt over here, we worked with concrete, we worked with colors. And coincidentally, on the right, when I was visiting a property and I was staying in this beautiful property in Orissa, and I saw that bathroom and how it stayed with me and what it does, I just wanted to connect the dots over here. Again, lamps that we work with, lamps that we've designed, materials that we work with, playing around with the form, taking something that is so solid, that is so rigid, and being able to manipulate it and to create something that is completely non-expected of the material. The softness that it creates is really exciting. Over here, I want to talk about color. I want to talk about how, and this is actually an Elia product. Talking about color, talking about what it does, and how it allows. This was a store that we designed, one of my first boutique spaces ever, where I designed a store for a fashion designer. And how do you take something, how do you create a story, how do you create a narrative without it taking away from the objective, which is to sell clothes, which is to sell garments, which is to engage people, but yet allow somebody to come in over there and feel relaxed and feel comfortable. This was also the time when I started designing my products. This was in the peak of COVID when we started designing the products and how they fit in over there. And I love that aspect of design. I love that the fact that you can borrow from different times. You can borrow. This project happened in 2019. We handed it over in 2020, and we documented the project in 2021, which is when the products came out. But yet how they so cohesively sit together. Again, resin, when I was talking about why I enjoy the material so much, what it does over here, we've done a different treatment on the resin. When you look at it, you can't really tell that it's resin. It doesn't glow. It's a lot more solid. What it does, just really enjoy working with the material. This is a project that I did with a very dear friend of mine, Vaishali Kamdar. And again, the idea of what is fluidity and how do you combine the two. There is a lot of rigidity, there are a lot of straight lines, but the art, the works by Annie Morris, the colors, and what it sort of does to the space is what was important for us over here. Once again, one of the pieces that we've designed, I work with casting a lot. We create pieces in aluminum, we create pieces in bronze. Sometimes we leave them raw, sometimes we paint them. And this was obviously borrowed from the idea of the water, the fluidity, and again, the same concept, right? You take something fluid, you cast it, and it comes out rigid, but yet you are able to play with the flow, you're able to create the softness in it, and I just love it. I'm going to end with this. This is a video of our booth last year at India Design in Bombay, where all these materials that I'm talking of are all coming together, and how they allow us to sort of create a cohesive world where everything is layered, and yet we're able to create something which just blends together, nothing sort of screaming to the other. And you can borrow from it what you want, you can take it all. I just love the flexibility. Thank you.
Now I come to the very interesting part in terms of looking at the color of the year, I think that's something which is big in terms of what we talk every time. The color of the year literally has basically a resonance from all the stories which we speak. It has a common thread which kind of really weaves across possibly the various color palettes in terms of what we speak. It has, today the color of the year which we speak about, it has the resonance of warmth, it has a certain familiarity in terms of what it speaks, it's grounded, it's radiant, it has a glow in terms of what it comes in, and therefore that's something which we look at in terms of looking at the color of the year. So the color of the year is what we call as the moonlit silk, which comes for you, and this is something which is our color of the year for this year. You can see it in all glory in the color pavilion to that extent. And when we look at this, the actual color looks like this in terms of what is there, which is the paint tab in terms of what you see overall. So if this color is really expresses slow joy, it is about radiance, but it is something which is grounded. It has a whole area of warmth and familiarity around it in a very strong way. It is something which basically looks at luminescence and glow, which is reflected in everyday rituals to that extent. It is also something which possibly has the grace, okay, and it might not have the grandeur, but it is something where we are looking at an understated optimism which is defined by the presence of the shade. So I think that's how possibly we look at the color of the year, and I think this is something which is very, very exciting, and you will see in terms of how possibly it kind of blends in terms of looking at really can be a part of any surface, any product, any decor in terms of how it kind of really comes by. We are pretty excited about how this really looks like. Let's look at what this color is all about. So that's what is moonlit, moonlit silk, the color of the year. Can we raise a toast to it? I think if you have your glasses, we can raise our glasses. That's the right color in terms of what you see, with a dash of green in it in terms of coming live. So I think cheers to, the whole area of moonlit silk, which is the color of the year in terms of how it unfolds. Hope you like the drink as well. I think, not only this, we have another interesting property in terms of what I speak about, and this property is what we call is the wallpaper of the year. And this is again something which is very different what we are looking at in terms of talking about. It is something which we speak of in terms of being very different. It is something which our creative director Pavitra has worked around with in terms of creating. It is what we call as the Zanskar. It is something which is very different in terms of how it kind of comes out. Zanskar is totally inspired from the altitude and the landscape of Mount Zanskar in terms of what we see. It reflects the whole area in terms of how we see that it is a reflection of time, it is a reflection of silence, it is a reflection of light in terms of how we have seen overall in terms of the landscape, in terms of how it unfolds. It is talking of a certain nuance. It talks of traditional pastoral embroidery which comes in, which is literally accompanied by hand-blocked Gilbert designs in terms of what really comes along with the wallpaper to that extent. In a sense, it kind of really is balancing the whole area of the ruggedness of the entire landscape with a refined art which comes, and therefore it honors literally the whole area of looking at patience, looking at tradition, and looking at the connection in terms of what it creates. So I think that is something which possibly is the nuance of this entire Zanskar in terms of what we call off. Let's look at how it kind of really looks and comes out.
Inspired by the high-altitude landscape of Zanskar, this design reflects a terrain shaped by silence, light, and time. A trellis of Himalayan roses unfolds across the surface, referencing traditional pastoral embroideries, where each bloom carries memory and skilled handwork. Hand-block printed gilva details catch the light like moonshine on mountain ridges, adding quiet warmth and depth. Balancing rugged landscape with refined craft, the design honors patience, tradition, and a lasting connection to place.
So that's Sanskar for you. Thank you, Pavitra, for really creating us for us. And I think it's something which is fabulous. And that's something which is basically brings us to the end of our stories in terms of what we have this year for you. And thank you all for joining us for this exhilarating session. Thank you.